Hello, good day, welcome, welcome back if you've been here before, and welcome if you're new to the channel. It's been a quite manic couple of weeks since I uploaded my top 10 records that you should own if you're an audiophile or a record collector. That was just my list, you know, everyone's got their own top 10 really. But that was just my list. But the viewing figures has gone through the roof. It's been really good. The response has been excellent. The subscriber count has gone up, which is excellent, and it's inspired me to do some more videos around that sort of topic. If you like the content, click like and subscribe. Do all the usual YouTube guff. It really does help my channel grow. I want to add more content regarding new releases, etc. So, you know, I'm working on that. I've got a few things coming up in the near future which are going to be excellent. I'm not going to say too much about them, but suffice to say, you know, I think you're going to like the content that's coming up in the next few months or so. So today's video is around my favourite, I wouldn't say my favourite guitarists, but I'm talking about guitarists that had an influence on me when I was growing up in the early 80s, when I first picked a guitar up and I started learning the guitar. I've got influences from many different genres. You know, when I was growing up as a teenager in the late 70s, early 80s, I was obviously deep in the weeds of the punk, post-punk, new wave thing, and obviously a lot of that had an influence on me, and certain guitarists had a massive impact on me as a budding guitar player. So this is purely a bit of fun. This is a list of 10 records which feature a guitarist that has had an influence or an impact on me in various ways over the last 40 years since I started playing a guitar properly and seriously. So without further ado, let's crack on with this list. So the first one is a curveball, because he's not a guitar player, he's a bass player, and that is The Cure, Faith. And the man in question is Simon Gallup. I was on holiday. I think if you've seen my A to Z rediscovering vinyl video, the first episode, I think it was the first video I ever done. If you see that, you'll see that I bought this when I was on holiday in Blackpool with my parents in 1981. And that was the first time I heard it when I got home from holiday and I put it on my record player. The first thing that I noticed about this record was the bass playing. It's not specifically complex or complicated. It isn't specifically technical. But what drew me in on this was Simon's, the tone of his bass and the effects that he was using. I was actually absolutely sold on this record when I first heard Primary, the opening, the second track on the album actually, Primary. I think at that time he was using an Electric Mistress flanger, and that is the predominant effect on his bass on this, is the flanger. On primary, there's actually 2 bass guitars. You've got one being played by Robert Smith and one by Simon Gallup. I think the one played by Robert Smith is a clean bass, and Simon Gallup's one has got the flanger on it, which gives that sort of jet sort of effect. Anyway, absolutely brilliant. His sensibility in playing, to me, had an impact on me as a guitar player. On tracks like Other Voices, you know, well, pretty much the whole album, to be honest. The track Faith is another example of less is more. Simon Gallup may not be one of the first bass players you think of when you think of standout bass players, but you know, that's reserved for the likes of your John Entwistles and your Stings and your Paul McCartneys, etc, etc. Simon Gallup's good. You know, he has got a sensibility, and he's good at doing riffs, and it shows on this record. But yeah, The Cure, Faith, probably one of my earliest influences, along with the next one. So next in line, so a little sort out here. So next in line was this one. This was a no-brainer. I got into this band when I was in senior school or high school if you're in America, and that is Steve Jones. Contrary to popular belief, there's only 2 musicians on this record, and that's Steve Jones and Paul Cook. I think the version of Anarchy on this is the Glenn Matlock version. That is the only aside to that. The rest of the album is Steve Jones and Paul Cook. Steve Jones, at a young age, I don't know how old he was when he done this album, 18, 19, he recorded all the guitars, he recorded all the bass parts. And he showed on this what a young upstart from Battersea could do. You know, he was an untrained guitar player. He'd only been learning to play guitar for a couple of years. He wasn't, you know, a virtuoso by any stretch of the imagination, but you cannot deny that what Steve did on this record with the other Pistols was next to astonishing, really. He single-handedly, on the guitar, rewrote the rule book on guitar bands, totally, from the ground up. If you've watched the documentary, the making of this album, Never Mind the Bollocks, if you've seen the making of the Classic Album documentary, where they go through each track, there's so many guitar overdubs that he did, and it shows a sensibility that he had. You just have this image of, you know, the Sex Pistols spitting and swearing and getting drunk all the time, but from all concerned in the recording of this, he was really on point. Him and Paul Cook were on point in the recording sessions for this, and Steve especially, because he was having to record the bass parts, which they'd only just sacked Glenn Matlock, so they were having to record the bass parts. Sid Vicious is on, I think, 1 or 2 tracks, but his bass is so buried in the mix he might as well not be there. So, you know, mentioning him in passing, he's not really relevant to this record to me, to be honest with you, at all. He didn't really contribute to the recording of it, and it is purely down to Steve and Paul. The whole sound of this album was crafted between Steve Jones, Paul Cook, and a producer. There's not much else you can say about this. It's a classic album. It had a massive impact on me as a guitar player in the early 80s when I first picked a guitar up. Steve had this, the punk ethos, you know, anyone can do it. 3 chords. But if you look at a lot of the tracks on this, a lot of them are just rock and roll. It's just rock and roll, but with attitude. And that's what good music is, I suppose. Rock and roll with an attitude. Steve Jones, the Sex Pistols, a massive influence on me. As I started maturing as a guitar player, it got to around about 1982, 83, and I started discovering bands like Pink Floyd, Susie and the Banshees, obviously The Cure. But one guitarist stood out for me, and I remember the first time I ever saw him was on a video jukebox in a pub in Harold Hill, Romford, where I used to live. It was in a pub called the Duckwood, and they had a video jukebox up on the wall, and they were playing a video of Susie and the Banshees performing Spellbound live. And the guitarist that was playing with them at that concert was John Mcgeok. And I wanted to mention John. I couldn't pull out just one album, so I pulled out two. Juju, he's all over this. He's on most of this. This is the singles, Once Upon a Time singles. This has got a lot of their good stuff on it. Happy House, Spellbound, Arabian Nights, Israel, all got John Mcgeok on it. John Mcgeok, what can you say about John Mcgeok? He influenced me into more textural playing and picking the strings rather than just strumming and being an out and out punky type guitar player. He made me sit back and think about effects more, and how to use effects on the guitar, and how to be more melodic in my playing. To me, John Mcgeok was a genius. You know, he used to be in Magazine, and then he was in Visage with Mcgeok, and then he was in the Banshees. And then after the Banshees, he was in Public Image Limited for a short time. But by that time, he was an alcoholic. I think he had drug problems. But we all know the end. You know how the story of John ended. Very sadly, he died. Such a shame. To this day, Susie Sue says that John Mcgeok was the best guitarist the Banshees ever had. And I echo that. I think their best stuff was done with John Mcgeok. Certainly, the more creative stuff was done with John Mcgeok. And yeah, you know, I was in a band in the early to mid 80s, and I was drawing heavy influences from John Mcgeok and Will Sargent from Echo and the Bunnymen at the time. So, you know, the way I was playing then was very, very reminiscent of John and Will Sargent. But yeah, John Mcgeok is, you know, he's up there. He's up there. Had a massive influence on me. And these particular records, Juju especially, you know, it's got Arabian Nights on it, Spellbound. You know, it's absolutely a brilliant album. I bought this when it first came out. A friend of mine at school bought it first, Rob. He bought it, played it to me. I fell in love with the album, went out and bought it as well. And that was it. That was the start of my love story with John Mcgeok, if you like. Yeah, excellent. Right, so we're now talking about albums that really had an impact on me. This one is a guitarist that always comes up in top 10 lists. He's in my list twice. He's in my list at this point, and he's in my list at number 1. And that's David Gilmour, but specifically this album, Final Cut. Now, this is going to raise a few eyebrows. I'm fully aware of that. You know, this album is, you know, a lot of people look at it as a Roger Waters album. I'm not getting drawn into that. I bought this when it first came out, and I absolutely fell in love with David Gilmour's guitar solos on this album. I think some of his best work is on this album, and it had a massive influence on me to actually learn lead guitar. You know, instead of just picking and strumming and doing the stuff that you normally do when you're learning, it actually sort of made me want to sit up and start learning scales and modes and stuff like that, and start learning about actually putting solos together, because up till then I just sort of played around with it. But this album in particular, I fell in love with this album. It isn't to everyone's taste, I get that. A lot of people, it's sort of drawn a wedge between Floyd fans, but to me this is okay. It's Pink Floyd's swan song, but I think it was a good album when it came out. I love it, and I specifically like David Gilmour's playing on this. Yeah, it just had a major influence on me. So that's it, the final cuts, Pink Floyd. Next I couldn't do a list of guitarists that have had an influence on me without mentioning this guy, and that is Steve Rothery from Marillion. Now, I've seen Marillion countless times. I've lost count the amount of times I've seen them. I've not seen them for the last 10 years or so. I sort of fell out of love with them for a while, didn't go and see them, but I think I've seen them probably 30 or 40 times, something like that. But specifically this album, I saw them twice on this tour, once at the Hammersmith Odeon and once at the Forum in Kentish Town, performing the album in full. This is Brave. It's a double album. It's their best album in my eyes. It is a complete concept album. And it's got some of Steve's best playing on it. Steve Rothery, for the uninitiated, he's very influenced by David Gilmour and some of the prog bands of the 70s, but since Steve Hogarth has joined the band, he's sort of found his own voice, if you like. In the early days, obviously they got slated for being too much like Genesis, and I don't think that was helped much by Fish, who was dressing up at the time with different characters and stuff, very much in the Genesis mould. But when Steve Hogarth came along, he took the band in a different direction, and I think it was a good direction. Still keeping their prog ethos, but in a more modern presentation, and it shows. And this album is absolutely brilliant. If you haven't heard this album, you owe it to yourself. This is Brave. It came out in 1994. It was recorded at Miles Copeland's chateau in the south of France and mixed in the UK. I think it was mixed in Liverpool, if memory serves me right. It was the last album they recorded for EMI before they were dumped by EMI. But that aside, this album features some of Steve Rothery's finest guitar moments. Steve's always had an influence on me as a guitar player, very much the same as David Gilmour has. And, you know, he's very emotional when he's playing. Lots of delay, lots of soaring lead guitar solos, very, very Gilmour-esque. If you like David Gilmour, you'll love Steve Rothery. If you've not really heard Marillion, you know, if the only Marillion you know is Kaylee, you need to get yourself up to date and listen to some later stuff. This, like I say, was 1984. Steve Hogarth wrote the whole concept. They recorded, it's their third album with Steve Hogarth. But it's a really, really good record. Yeah, Brave, Marillion. Right, my next choice. So we're getting near the top of the list now. So my next choice, I did a video about this band the other week. It was an unboxing of Urban Hymns, but I'm going to mention it again. And that's Nick Mccabe. Now, when this came out, I've been playing guitar for quite a few years. I mean, this came out in, what, 97, I think? I can't remember, can't work it out, can't see. I think it was 97 this came out, 96, 97. I'd already been playing for quite a few years, but I sort of didn't get interested in the Manchester scene or anything like that. The Happy Mondays, wasn't really interested in the Happy Mondays. I sort of listened a little bit to the Stone Roses, didn't really get drawn in by them, but when the Britpop thing happened in the 90s, I wasn't really interested in Oasis, wasn't really interested in Blur, but when I heard the Verve, especially their first album, it blew me away, because it was totally different to anything else that anyone else was doing. Totally different. It was a dark psychedelia rock, but yeah, it was really, really good. But I'm showing Urban Hymns really because it's partner album. It was in the box set actually, but I'm showing the vinyl. But the box set has got a CD in it of Live at Hay Hall, and it's only when you listen to that record, that CD, that recording, that you realise just how damn good Nick Mccabe is. Nick Mccabe is more of a sculptor with music. He doesn't so much play the guitar as he sculptures sounds out of the guitar using lots of different effects and multiple delays and layering and etc. You know, he creates soundscapes, and Richard Ashcroft and the rest of the band just play in front of it. But on the Hay Hall recording, he's very, very up in the mix, very, very dominant. There's tracks like Weeping Willow, which are really, really showcasing Nick's playing, 100%. You know, from a guitarist perspective, for me, it was a breath of fresh air, because he was playing totally against principles that I had learned at the time. You know, yeah, we've all played with feedback, we've all done that sort of thing, but he was building and sculpturing layers of sound to make it sound like a keyboard almost, you know, or an orchestra, you know, and he does deserve kudos for that. Nick Mccabe is one of my top guitarists at the moment. You know, he was in a band called Black Submarine. They're a great band. I don't think he's doing anything with them now. He's now a lecturer at a university on a music course he teaches. But yeah, when he was with the Verve, he was an absolute force of nature. If you've not really taken any notice of Nick Mccabe's playing, listen to, well, I would listen to the first 3 Verve albums, Northern Soul, A Storm in Heaven, and this one. Absolutely brilliant. This one, I love it. A lot of people think they sold out. Yeah, well, you know, they earned money out of it, you know, but hey ho, they've still done a good album. But yeah, the Verve, Nick Mccabe, excellent. So we're getting to number 4. This is the 4th one, number 4 in my list. And this is an album, again, that had a massive influence on me as a record in the early 80s, but specifically the guitar playing on it. And that is David Bowie and Robert Fripp. Now, I'd never really been into King Crimson. I've always struggled to get into King Crimson when I've listened to them. I appreciate they've been going for ever, and they're still going to this day. I totally appreciate that Robert Fripp is an absolutely off this planet guitar player, and this record shows. He's well known for using different tunings on guitars and different string gauges in different places, etc. He invents his own chords, he does this, he does that. God knows what tuning the guitars were in when he done this album. It was I think it was the 2nd time he worked with Bowie. He worked with Bowie on the Heroes album. He's on the Heroes, but he's all over this as well. Absolutely brilliant guitar playing, totally off the wall lead playing. Whenever other guitarists have played these songs live, they've never even come close to sounding like Robert Fripp. But who can? You know, he had this record and the guitar playing on this itself had a massive impact on me. I wouldn't say it was an influence on me, because I couldn't even try to emulate Robert Fripp, and I wouldn't try, but it made me sit back and take stock of, you know, what it was to be a great guitar player. And Robert Fripp's on another level, totally on another level. Yeah, Robert Fripp, Scary Monsters. Now we get to someone that I don't feel gets enough recognition. And we're talking about Chris Isaak. This is the only Chris Isaak record I own. I will be getting Heart Shaped World at some point, which I do want. It's a great album, but the guitar player on this, a guy called James Wilsey. He's the man responsible for all those super clean guitars that you hit, the guitar that you hear on Wicked Game, Blue Hotel, you know, the classical playing on Spanish Sky. Absolutely brilliant playing. He's no longer with us. He died, I think, of drug related issues. He had a drug problem. But James Wilsey is what I'd call a classy guitar player, and he could get things out of a Stratocaster that, although sound really simple, sometimes they're not. To get that feel, you've got to really have it in yourself to do it, and James Wilsey had that in spades. He had feel in spades. Very reminiscent, obviously, of 50s playing. He played a Stratocaster. I'm not sure what model it was. It might have been a vintage one, probably a 70s one. But he played a Stratocaster through a Fender Twin, a super clean amplifier, and he coupled that, strangely enough, with a digital delay, like a digital echo, not analog or tape echo. He used digital because he wanted to try and keep it as clean as possible, and it showed. He was the master of that. And yeah, this album, Wicked Game, it's a compilation album of the first few albums that James did with Chris Isaak. It's worth checking out. It actually holds its price. This record itself, I think you won't get much change from about £30 for a VG Plus off Discogs. It's got all the best bits on it, all the best hits, which is why I bought it. I didn't want to collect the entire Chris Isaak collection, although I will probably, like I say, get Heart Shaped World, which is a great album, and again has got James Wilsey all over it. But yeah, check him out, James Wilsey. There's some good video footage of him on YouTube. If you check up Wicked Game live and look back, you'll see James Wilsey. He's a short guy with like a Beatley type haircut, but he plays a Stratocaster, and you know, he's absolutely brilliant. James Wilsey. Next is a new guy to me. I don't know much about him, but when I bought this album, I bought it on a recommendation from someone on YouTube, and that is Midnight Blue by Kenny Burrell. I'm a late comer to jazz, totally admit that, and this is my first guitar-based jazz album, and I'm sold, absolutely sold. If I want to chill out and relax, I'll put this on. It's all instrumental, it's absolutely brilliant, and Kenny Burrell is, again, like James Wilsey, he's a master of playing a clean guitar. There's no effects, there's no you know, processing, there's no nothing. All it is a guitar into an amplifier, and that is it. That's all you need. If you're a good guitar player, that's all you need. You don't need anything more than that. And you know, and Kenny Burrell, absolutely brilliant. And this is a classic album. It's probably his best, known as his best album. I've not really heard anything else by him. I'm going to seek out some more records by Kenny Burrell. But yeah, Midnight Blue, absolutely brilliant album. I was absolutely flabbergasted when I heard this for the first time about 6 months ago. Only problem I've got with this copy of it is a Blue Note reissue, but it's bowl warped, so I have to put a weight on it, a record weight on it, to flatten it out. Other than that, it's absolutely fine. But yeah, Kenny Burrell, Midnight Blue. I might actually see if I can get the Analog Productions version of this, because I think they do a 45 RPM version of this, which sounds like it could be good. So yeah, Kenny Burrell, Midnight Blue, worth checking out if you're into good, classy, like bluesy guitar playing, jazz. You can't go wrong. Kenny Burrell, Midnight Blue. And we come to the last one. As I said earlier, this is another David Gilmour one, but this album of theirs is the one that actually I've played the most regularly ever since I bought it back in 1982. I love this album so much. I went into a studio in the mid-80s, or mid to late 80s, probably about 87, and recorded one of the tracks off of this myself, playing all the instruments except for keyboards and the drums. I played everything else, and that is Animals. This album, to me, is Pink Floyd at their best. Now, it wasn't very well recorded, we know that now. I think it was because they recorded at their own studio, Britannia Row. It was the first time they'd used that studio, so they were probably and likely getting used to the equipment in there. Their sound engineer probably wasn't, you know, as clued up on it as much as he maybe could have been. And the mastering on this is somewhat, the mixing on this is somewhat, you know, woolly. It's not as dynamic as it could be. But back then, I knew no different. And to me, this was perfect. This was perfection. And I suppose in some respects, this is perfection. This is the Bernie Grundman remaster that would come out in, I think it was 2017, something like that, can't remember. But I'm well aware, obviously, we've got the new remix. I'm going to be doing an unboxing and a review of the deluxe box set when it comes out in October. But going on this, first and foremost, the track Dogs has probably got David Gilmour's finest moments in it. Full stop. This is my opinion, obviously. Everything on this album that David Gilmour's got his hand in is perfect. There's absolutely nothing wrong, to me, with this record. It flows perfectly. When they did it live, they did it out of sequence. They did it in a different sequence to the album. And I actually think it flows better using the live sequence. Those that know me know that I play, or have played in Pink Floyd tribute bands, and my ambition has always been to perform this album live, the same as it was done back in '77 on the In the Flesh tour, where, you know, it was fairly stripped down. They didn't have backing tracks, they didn't have all this crap that people rely on now. There was just Pink Floyd, Snowy White, and that was it. That's all they needed: 2 guitars, bass, drums and keyboards, and they managed to perform the whole album, really. There's not much else I can say about this. It's David Gilmour. To me, it's his finest moment. The guitar solos on Dogs are otherworldly to me. I love them. I can play them, all of them, obviously. But yeah, this is my #1 album, and the biggest influence on me as a guitar player is this album, and specifically David Gilmour's playing on it. This album has been with me since 1982 in different forms: CD, vinyl, download. Whichever form I've had it in, I've listened to it. I've had it in the car, and I tend to binge this album. I'll have it in the car and I'll play it non-stop for like 2 weeks, then I'll stop and I'll come back to it 6 months later, and I'll just binge it again for another 2 or 3 weeks. It's like that. I've got that sort of relationship with this album. I can't let it go. And yeah, Animals, Pink Floyd, to me, their finest hour, and yet to be equalled by anything else they've done. But that is only my opinion. So that's the end of this video. Coming up soon, I'm still buying some new records. I'm going to be doing another vinyl finds soon once I've got enough to share with you. If you like the content, click like and subscribe. Do all the usual YouTube guff, and I shall see you in the next video. Well, thank you very much. Goodbye.